disability did not diminish his responsibility for a calculated, horrific crime. The tension between those perspectives continues to shape discussions about capital punishment in Indiana and across the nation. For Stacey Payne's family, the execution brought a measure of closure. For Roy Ward's attorneys and supporters, it represented a troubling step backward. And for the state of Indiana, it was one more execution in a year that had already seen the death chamber reopen after 15 years of silence. Yet not every Indiana case ended in execution. Some resulted in sentences that ensured the convicted would never see freedom again. Case 5, Raymond Childs. When a father disciplines his teenage son, the expectation is frustration, maybe anger, perhaps even a slammed door. No one imagines it will end in a massacre. Raymond Childs III was born in October 2003 and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. His father, Raymond Childs Jr., was a music producer and founder of Just Real Records, a local label that worked with aspiring artists in the community. The family lived in a modest home on Adams Street on the city's east side, a neighborhood where everyone knew each other and families looked out for one another. But behind closed doors, life in the Childs household was more complicated. Court testimony would later reveal that Raymond III had witnessed domestic violence throughout his childhood, including incidents involving his mother and her boyfriends. Psychological experts who evaluated him described exposure to complex trauma that shaped his emotional development and left him struggling with anger and impulse control. Despite these challenges, Raymond was considered below average intellectually and had difficulty expressing his thoughts and emotions in healthy ways. On the night of January 23, 2021, 17-year-old Raymond III took his father's vehicle without permission and stayed out past curfew. When he returned home after midnight, his father confronted him. Raymond Jr. made it clear that his son was in serious trouble and that there would be consequences. It was a normal parental response to a teenager breaking the rules, a promise of discipline to be delivered later. But Raymond III didn't wait to find out what his punishment would be. In the early hours of January 24, 2021, while his family slept, Raymond III retrieved a Draco 7.62 firearm from somewhere in the house. What happened next was methodical and unforgiving. He moved through the home, room by room, and opened fire on everyone inside. His father, Raymond Jr., 42 years old, was taken by surprise. According to testimony from the lone survivor, Raymond Jr.'s last words were, "I'm sorry, Raymond, I love you." Those words didn't stop his son from pulling the trigger. Raymond III also targeted his stepmother, Kezzie Childs, 42, and his older brother, Elijah, 18. He went to his 13-year-old sister, Rita's room, and ended her life as well. Then he turned the weapon on Kiara Hawkins, 19, who was Elijah's girlfriend and was pregnant with their child. She was just a week away from giving birth to a baby boy. Both Kiara and her unborn son, later named Chaos Hawkins, were counted among the victims. 6 lives extinguished in minutes. But Raymond III wasn't finished. His 15-year-old brother, Xavier, woke to the sounds of gunfire and tried to flee. Raymond III chased him through the house, cornering him in a hallway. Xavier begged for his life, even pulling out $44 in cash from his pocket and offering it to his brother if he would just stop. Raymond III looked him in the eyes, said nothing, raised the gun, and fired. The first shot hit Xavier in the leg, dropping him to the floor. The second shot struck him again. Raymond III then left, apparently assuming his younger brother was finished. Bleeding and in agony, Xavier somehow managed to crawl to a neighbor's porch and call for help. When police arrived, he gasped out what had happened. He shot them all. When asked who, Xavier replied, "Raymond Childs." officers entered the home and found a scene of unimaginable carnage. Bodies were scattered throughout the residence, each victim having been shot at close range. The 911 call had come in as a report of shots fired, but no one was prepared for the scale of what they discovered. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Chief Randall Taylor.
Listen up, soccer fans. Why wait for the summer when the world's superstars are already battling?
That's what the Champions League's about.
Fighting not for flags, but for crests and the blood-sworn faithful who follow them.
Oh, what a fabulous ball.
16 iconic clubs, 0 second chances, and every match is a main event. The UEFA Champions League knockout phase. Stream every match live on Paramount+.
I made a concept candle brand just so I could make a cool box for it, and I used Adobe Illustrator to bring that vision to life. The scent I came up with is called Bloomberry, a combination of spring flowers and fresh fruit.
Later described it as the deadliest mass shooting the city had seen in over a decade. Raymond III fled the scene immediately after the attack. He was arrested the following day at a relative's home in Plainfield. Extended family members had obtained the murder weapon from him and turned it over to police within hours, helping investigators piece together what had occurred. Raymond III was charged with 6 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of unlawful possession of a handgun. His first trial in July 2024 ended in a mistrial after an emotional outburst in the courtroom. A family member, unable to contain their anguish, turned to Raymond III and shouted, "Why did you do it, Raymond?" The judge ruled that the disruption had compromised the proceedings, and a new trial was ordered. The second trial began in October 2024 and lasted 5 days. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: ballistics reports, Xavier's testimony, forensic analysis of the crime scene, and testimony from investigators who had interviewed Raymond III after his arrest. The defense argued that Raymond III had been shaped by years of trauma and abuse, pointing to his exposure to domestic violence and his cognitive limitations. They claimed he hadn't planned to commit murder, but had acted impulsively in a moment of emotional overload. But the jury wasn't persuaded. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges. The evidence was simply too strong. Raymond III had moved through the house methodically, targeting each victim with precision. This was not a crime of passion. It was calculated violence. On March 10, 2025, Judge Charles Miller sentenced Raymond Childs III to 360 years in prison, 6 consecutive 60-year terms for the murders, plus additional time for the attempted murder of Xavier. The judge called the crime one of the worst mass murders in Indianapolis history and expressed serious doubts that Raymond III could ever be trusted to live among free society. During the sentencing hearing, Raymond III addressed the courtroom. He did not apologize. He did not accept responsibility. Instead, he proclaimed his innocence, saying, "I lost family just like everyone else did. I'm not a murderer. I'm not a killer." The statement shocked those in attendance, many of whom had hoped for some acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears issued a statement emphasizing that no penalty could ever truly reflect the harm done. He honored the memories of Raymond Childs Jr., Kezzie Childs, Elijah Childs, Rita Childs, Kiara Hawkins, and Chaos Hawkins, urging the community to support their grieving families. Raymond Childs III will spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no possibility of parole. Xavier, the sole survivor, continues to carry both physical and emotional scars from that horrific night. The Adams Street home where the massacre occurred became a memorial site, with neighbors leaving flowers, candles, and messages of grief. The case serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from within our own families. Raymond Childs III. Our story is one of unimaginable violence, but it's also a story about trauma, untreated mental health issues, and the catastrophic consequences of a single moment when rage overpowers reason. It's a tragedy with no winners, only victims, survivors, and a community left to mourn. While Raymond Childs III will never leave prison, another case on Indiana's death row involved a crime so calculated that it shocked even seasoned investigators. Case 6. Jeffrey Weisheidt. When firefighters arrived at the burning home in Evansville, Indiana, on that April morning in 2010, they expected a tragic accident. What they discovered instead was evidence of one of the most disturbing crimes the state had ever seen. Jeffrey Weisheidt had been dating Lisa Lynch since 2008, when they met as co-workers at a plastics manufacturing plant. Lisa was going through a divorce from the father of her 2 children, 8-year-old Alyssa and 5-year-old Caleb. Weisheidt stepped into her life during that difficult transition, and at first, everything seemed promising. He was attentive, helpful with the kids, and talked about a future together. They even went ring shopping, though they never officially became engaged. Lisa was pregnant with Weisheidt's child, and to those around them, it looked like they were building a blended family. But behind that facade, tensions were building. Weisheidt had a history of instability. He'd been honorably discharged from the military after just 1 month due to psychological issues. His employment was sporadic, and he struggled to maintain steady income. In the weeks leading up to April 2010, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He stopped paying bills that he had always paid on time. He quit his steady job without explanation. He tried to get a refund on the engagement ring he'd put in layaway, telling the jeweler he was moving to Brazil and needed the money. On the night of April 9th, 2010, Lisa was working her regular overnight shift at the plant. Weisheidt was home, watching Alyssa and Caleb, as he often did when Lisa worked nights. Around 3 a.m., Weisheidt called his brother Scott and asked him to come pick him up at a Days Inn in Franklin, claiming his car had broken down. When Scott arrived, Weisheidt asked him to drive him and his girlfriend to Edinburgh in Weisheidt's white van. Scott noticed something white in the back of the van, but didn't investigate further. As they drove south on Highway 31, Weisheidt suddenly asked Scott to take him to Camp Atterbury, a remote military training area with dense woods and few visitors. Scott complied, driving to a gravel turnaround deep in the forest. Weisheidt got out and told Scott he could leave. Scott did, thinking nothing more of it at the time. Meanwhile, Lisa received a frantic phone call just after midnight. Her neighbor reported that her house was on fire. Lisa tried desperately to reach Weisheidt, calling and texting repeatedly. He didn't respond. She contacted OnStar, the tracking service for Weisheidt's Camaro, and representatives were able to reach him, but he refused to take Lisa's call. Panicked and confused, Lisa got a ride from a coworker and rushed toward home, nearly 45 minutes away. By the time she arrived, the house was fully engulfed in flames. Firefighters were battling the blaze, but it had been burning for hours. Weisheidt's Camaro was nowhere in sight. Lisa's worst fears were confirmed when emergency responders told her the children were still inside. It wasn't until 7:45 a.m., hours after the fire started, that firefighters located Caleb's remains in the smoldering rubble. He had been lying face down on a burned mattress, and the discovery was immediately suspicious. Caleb's small body had been bound with duct tape in what the coroner described as a hogtied position. a washcloth had been duct taped into his mouth. Even more disturbing, investigators found road flares on the mattress near his body and another flare stuffed into his underwear. Alyssa's body wasn't found until after 3 p.m. that afternoon. She had been huddled in a fetal position inside a bedroom closet, likely trying to hide from the smoke and flames. Both children had passed away from respiratory arrest caused by smoke inhalation. Weishaupt, meanwhile, had fled Indiana entirely. Police tracked him using OnStar and engaged in a high-speed chase that reached speeds over 100 mph before finally apprehending him in Covington, Kentucky. When they searched his vehicle, they found more than $4,000 in cash, money he'd withdrawn before leaving. He had removed all his personal belongings from the house before the fire started. During questioning, Weishaupt initially denied setting the fire. He claimed it must have been caused by faulty electrical work he'd done in the house. When pressed about the road flares and Caleb's restraints, Weishaupt suggested that first responders might have staged the scene to frame him, an accusation that investigators found both absurd and insulting. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic experts determined the fire had been deliberately set, using the road flares as an accelerant. The presence of duct tape and restraints on Caleb indicated premeditation. Weishaupt's actions before the fire, quitting his job, withdrawing money, removing his belongings, fleeing the state, all pointed to a calculated plan. Weishaupt's trial took place in Clark County in 2013, relocated from Vanderburgh County due to extensive media coverage. The case lasted more than 2 weeks, with prosecutors presenting forensic evidence, witness testimony from Lisa, and statements from Weishaupt's own family members, who described his increasingly strange behavior. The defense argued that the state couldn't prove Weishaupt intentionally set the fire, suggesting it could have been an accident. The jury deliberated for just over 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 2 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. Days later, they unanimously recommended the death penalty. Under Indiana law, the judge was bound by that recommendation and sentenced Weishaupt to death in July 2013. At sentencing, Lisa Lynch read a long, emotional letter to the court, describing the unbearable pain of losing her children in such a horrific way. She talked about Alyssa's love of school and her dreams of becoming a teacher. She described Caleb's infectious laugh and his excitement about starting kindergarten. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. Weishaupt has since appealed his conviction multiple times, all without success. The Indiana Supreme Court upheld his death sentence, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case. In 2023, a federal judge denied his latest appeal, citing a lack of evidence for claims of ineffective counsel, and noting that Weishaupt had engaged in intentional delay tactics. Jeffrey Weishaupt remains on Indiana's death row, where he will likely stay for years as final appeals continue. His case stands as one of the most disturbing in the state's history. A man who betrayed the trust of a woman and her children, then attempted to destroy all evidence by burning them alive. For Lisa Lynch, the pain will never fully heal, and the questions about why Weishaupt did what he did may never have satisfying answers. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are those who hide behind a mask of normalcy, and Jeffrey Weishaupt's story proves that even people we think we know can be capable of unthinkable evil. But not every Indiana case involved men. One of the state's most controversial convictions centered on a woman whose guilt remains hotly debated to this day. Case 7, Sarah Jo Pender. The woman prosecutors called the female Charles Manson concert, and the two quickly fell into an intense relationship. Hull was a hulking former high school football player with a criminal history that included auto theft and residential entry convictions. Despite the red flags, Sarah moved in with him, and the couple shared a home on Michael Street with two of Hull's friends, Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman. Both roommates were fugitives from Nevada. Nordman had escaped while serving time for forgery, and Cataldi was wanted on drug charges related to methamphetamine possession with intent to sell. According to later testimony, Hull and Cataldi began dealing drugs together from the house, creating an increasingly tense and volatile environment. Neighbors reported frequent arguments, often centered around money Hull's sister allegedly owed Cataldi. On October 24, 2000, everything exploded. That morning, Sarah purchased a 12-gauge shotgun at a Walmart in Indianapolis. Hours later, Cataldi and Nordman were deceased, both having been shot multiple times. Their bodies were wrapped and disposed of in a dumpster, where they were discovered days later. Police used tattoos and dental records to identify the victims. When investigators focused on Sarah and Hull, the evidence against them seemed straightforward. Sarah had bought the murder weapon. She admitted to helping dispose of the bodies and cleaning the crime scene afterward. But there was no physical evidence placing her at the actual moment of the shootings. No witnesses saw her pull the trigger. In fact, Sarah claimed she had gone for a walk that night and returned home to find Hull panicked, the bodies already deceased, and Hull insisting they had to cover it up. Hull told a different story. He claimed Sarah had manipulated him into committing the murders, that she was tired of the roommates and wanted them gone. The prosecution's case hinged on a letter Sarah had allegedly written to Hull from jail, confessing to planning the killings. Hull's attorney handed this letter to investigators, and it became the centerpiece of the state's argument. During trial in 2002, Deputy Prosecutor Larry Sells painted Sarah as a master manipulator who controlled Hull through psychological dominance and intimacy. He compared her to Charles Manson, arguing that while she hadn't physically committed the murders, she had orchestrated them by pulling Hull's strings. The comparison stuck, and media outlets began calling Sarah the female Charles Manson, a nickname that would haunt her for decades. The only other significant evidence came from Floyd Pennington, a jailhouse informant who testified that Sarah had confessed details of the crime to him while incarcerated. The jury found Sarah guilty of 2 counts of murder and sentenced her to 110 years in prison. Hull, who pleaded guilty and claimed Sarah had influenced him, initially received 75 years. Later increased to 90 years when he admitted to forging evidence, still less than Sarah's sentence despite being the one who admitted pulling the trigger. But cracks in the case began appearing almost immediately. In 2003, Hull signed an affidavit recanting his story. He admitted that he had acted alone and that the letter supposedly written by Sarah was a forgery. Hull explained that he had another inmate forge the letter after studying samples of Sarah's handwriting from her actual correspondence. He confessed to framing her to shift responsibility for his own actions. Years later, more problems emerged. Floyd Pennington, the jailhouse informant, whose testimony had been crucial, appeared on a list of inmates who had received benefits, including early release and special privileges, in exchange for providing testimony in various cases. Legal experts noted that if Pennington's credibility was seriously undermined, the entire verdict could be called into question. Most remarkably, Larry Sells himself, the prosecutor who had sent Sarah to prison, came forward in the 2020s to say he now believed she was innocent. After learning about the forged letter, the compromised informant, and other irregularities in the case, Sells stated publicly that Sarah deserved a new trial. He told reporters he had never seen anything like this happen in any case he'd ever prosecuted, and that justice was long overdue for Sarah Pender. But Sarah's legal troubles didn't end with her conviction. In August 2008, she escaped from Rockville Correctional Facility with the help of prison guard Scott Spittler, with whom she'd been having an intimate relationship behind bars. Spittler, who was married with children, helped Sarah obtain civilian clothes and a cell phone. She changed into regular clothing in the prison gym, walked out, and disappeared. For 4 months, Sarah lived under the name Ashley Thompson in Chicago. She worked odd jobs, cut and dyed her hair, and tried to gather enough money to flee the country. She was eventually featured on America's Most Wanted and became one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. A man she'd been seeing as a sugar daddy for quick cash recognized her from television coverage and confronted her. Despite her insistence that she was innocent of the original murders, he contacted authorities. Sarah was captured in December 2008 and returned to Indiana. She was convicted of escape and received an additional 6 years on top of her existing sentence. As punishment, she spent 170 days, over 5 years, in solitary confinement at Indiana Women's Prison. She described the experience as psychological torture, but prison officials claimed she was too intelligent and manipulative to be housed in general population. Scott Spittler was fired, convicted of aiding an escape, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He was paroled in 2011. His wife divorced him. Jamie Long, a former cellmate who helped facilitate the escape, also received 7 years and was released in 2013. Sarah's case has since attracted national attention. Georgetown University's Making an Exoneree program took up her cause, with law students investigating the conviction and advocating for her release. Even Richard Hull's trial judge later expressed concern about irregularities in how evidence had been handled. In December 2024, Sarah appeared before a Marion County judge seeking sentence modification. Now in her mid-40s, having served more than 2 decades behind bars, she asked for mercy. She acknowledged that she deserved punishment for her role in covering up the crime, but argued that 110 years was excessive and unjust given the new evidence. Her attorney emphasized that Sarah's case represents one of the few times in history when the original prosecutor has publicly admitted to being wrong. The judge has not yet ruled on the petition. Sarah's projected release date under her current sentence is 2054, when she will be 75 years old. Her case remains one of Indiana's most controversial, raising profound questions about wrongful convictions, prosecutorial ethics, and whether justice can ever be achieved when fundamental questions about guilt remain unanswered. Sarah Jo Pender's story proves that sometimes the most complicated cases aren't about what happened. They're about who we believe and why. While Sarah Pender's guilt remains debated, another Indiana case involved a killer whose actions ate. Orville Lynn Majors. When patients started dying at an alarming rate in a small-town hospital, no one wanted to believe a trusted nurse could be responsible. But the numbers didn't lie, and they painted a picture of one of Indiana's most prolific serial killers. Orville Lynn Majors was born in April 1961 in Linton, Indiana, a small town of fewer than 6,000 residents. As a teenager, he cared for his elderly grandmother, and the experience inspired him to pursue nursing. He graduated from Nashville Memorial School of Practical Nursing in 1989 and took a job at Vermilion County Hospital in Clinton, north of Terre Haute. He briefly left for a higher-paying position in Tennessee, but returned to Vermilion County Hospital in 1993, where he was welcomed back with open arms. Majors quickly became one of the most popular nurses at the facility, especially among elderly patients. He received glowing evaluations from supervisors who praised his attentiveness and bedside manner. Patients appreciated his gentle touch and reassuring presence during difficult times. To everyone who knew him, Majors seemed like exactly the kind of person you'd want caring for your loved ones.
Every match, every goal,
Stupefying magnificent!
every moment
Unbelievable!
of Barcelona's Champions League season streams live on Paramount+.
Switch to Google Fi Wireless and get 25 gigabytes of high-speed hotspot tethering per month for each line on our unlimited standard phone plan. Connect your laptop or share your signal with a friend. You'll get top priority data speeds on America's fastest 5G network. And it's just $80 a month for 2 lines. Join the unlimited standard phone plan from Google Fi Wireless. Switch today.
But something strange was happening at Vermilion County Hospital. Before Majors returned in 1993, the 56-bed facility with its small 4-bed intensive care unit averaged about 26 patient deaths per year, a normal rate for a rural hospital serving an aging population. After Majors came back, the death rate skyrocketed to more than 100 deaths annually. Nearly 1 out of every 3 patients admitted to the hospital was dying, a statistic so alarming that it couldn't be ignored. Hospital administrators began noticing patterns. Patients who had been stable or even improving would suddenly take a sharp downturn when Majors was on duty. Some died from erratic heartbeats after respiratory arrest, the reverse of the normal pattern. Others developed fatal conditions they hadn't had upon admission. Nurses reported seeing Majors entering patient rooms shortly before codes were called, often administering unauthorized injections. The most damning statistic emerged during the investigation. When Majors was working, a patient died on average every 23 hours. When he was off duty, the death rate dropped to 1 every 551 hours, a difference so stark that it couldn't be coincidental. A patient was 42 times more likely to die when Majors was on shift. In March 1995, an anonymous letter was sent to state health agencies and local media, directly naming Majors as a killer. The Indiana State Department of Health and Indiana State Police launched a full investigation, one of the most extensive in state history. Over the next 2.5 years, investigators exhumed 15 bodies and conducted detailed forensic examinations. Nursing reviews revealed that during a 22-month period, Majors had been on duty for 130 of the 147 deaths that occurred at the hospital. The Indiana State Nursing Board suspended Majors' license in December 1995 after determining he had exceeded his authority by administering emergency drugs without supervision and working in the ICU without a physician present. The hospital terminated his employment. But criminal charges were more complicated. Prosecutors had to prove not only that Majors had committed murder, but that murders had even occurred in the first place. The breakthrough came from forensic analysis. Medical experts concluded that the deaths were consistent with injections of potassium chloride and epinephrine, drugs that cause sudden cardiac arrest and are difficult to detect in deceased patients, especially those who were already ill. When police searched Majors' home and vehicle, they found containers of both substances, despite having no legitimate reason to possess them. Witness testimony added another layer to the case. Andrew Harris, Majors' former roommate, testified that Majors often said elderly patients should be gassed and were a waste. Another acquaintance, Donald Miller, claimed Majors confessed in 1996 to using potassium chloride to end patients' lives. While Miller's testimony was questioned, he hadn't reported the confession until police approached him. It corroborated the physical evidence. Majors was arrested in 1997 and charged with 7 counts of murder. His trial took place in Brazil, Indiana, in 1999, relocated from Vermilion County due to media attention. The case lasted 6 weeks, with jurors hearing testimony from medical staff, forensic experts, victims' family members, and character witnesses. The prosecution built a methodical case showing that Majors had opportunity, means, and motive. He targeted patients he viewed as demanding or difficult, those who added to his workload. The jury convicted Majors on 6 counts of murder, but deadlocked on the 7th because that victim had taken longer to die than the others. In November 1999, Judge Ernest Yelton sentenced Majors to 6 consecutive 60-year terms, 360 years total, the maximum possible under Indiana law at the time. The judge described Majors' actions as diabolical acts and a parallel of evil at its most wicked, stating that the maximum sentence is the minimum sentence in this case. Victims' families filed wrongful death lawsuits against Vermilion County Hospital and several officials, claiming negligence in supervising Majors. Most families settled and received compensation from a state patients fund. The hospital was fined $80,000 for code violations and briefly forced to close after losing accreditation. It later reopened under the name West Central Community Hospital. Majors maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration. He appealed multiple times, but the Indiana Supreme Court upheld his conviction in 2002. He gave interviews claiming he'd been railroaded and that the deaths were due to natural causes in an aging population. But medical evidence and statistical analysis made those claims impossible to believe. In prison, Majors was considered a model inmate with only 3 minor infractions over 18 years. His last recorded visitor was in 2015. On September 24, 2017, at age 56, Majors became unresponsive at Indiana State Prison while experiencing breathing difficulties. He was taken to a nearby hospital and pronounced deceased. Preliminary autopsy results showed he had cardiac issues and died of natural causes. A stark irony, given that he had caused so many others to die from induced cardiac arrest. Though convicted of 6 murders, investigators believe Majors may have been responsible for over 100 deaths during his time at Vermilion County Hospital. He remains one of the most prolific serial killers in Indiana history, earning the nickname Angel of Death for the way he used his position of trust to end lives he deemed unworthy. Majors' case led to significant changes in healthcare oversight in Indiana. Stricter protocols for reporting unexpected deaths were implemented, and enhanced monitoring of licensed practical nurses became standard. The case also highlighted the importance of statistical analysis in identifying patterns of suspicious deaths in medical settings. For the families who lost loved ones to Majors, his death brought mixed emotions. Some felt he took the easy way out, dying peacefully instead of facing execution. Others found solace knowing he would never harm anyone again. Gracie Carruthers, sister of one victim, said subjecting Majors to die the same way his victims had would be the easy way out. Orville Lynn Majors proved that monsters don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they wear scrubs, carry stethoscopes, and smile reassuringly while administering death. But not every death row inmate in Indiana faced execution. Some were deemed too mentally ill to understand their punishment. Case 9, Michael Dean. Overstreet, The headlights went out. The young college student pulled to the side of the road, confused about why her car had suddenly stopped. She had no way of knowing that the damage to her rear bumper wasn't an accident, and that the man approaching her window had been waiting for exactly this moment. Michael Dean Overstreet grew up in rural Indiana, where those who knew him described a withdrawn, troubled young man. He met Melissa Holland in high school, and she later recalled that he initially seemed protective, helping her avoid bullies. They married young, and Melissa soon learned that Michael's behavior was far more troubling than she'd realized. He developed an obsession with knives, carrying them constantly and practicing with them daily. His mood swings became unpredictable and frightening, creating an atmosphere of tension in their home. Michael briefly served in the Marines after enlisting, hoping military structure might help him. Instead, he was discharged after just 1 month due to psychological problems. Back in Indiana, he drifted between construction jobs and periods of unemployment, his mental state deteriorating. Melissa noticed his fascination with news coverage of violent crimes, particularly cases involving young women. She told investigators he would watch reports obsessively, absorbing every detail. On the evening of September 26, 1997, 18-year-old Kelly Eckhart finished her shift at a Walmart in Franklin and headed home to Bogstown. She was a freshman at Franklin College, balancing her studies with part-time work to support herself. She was an honor student with a bright future, loved by her family and friends. As she drove along the dark, rural road, her headlights suddenly failed. Confused, she pulled over to investigate. What Kelly didn't know was that her car had been deliberately struck from behind. Michael Overstreet had bumped her vehicle hard enough to damage it, but not hard enough to cause serious injury, just enough to make her stop. When she got out to check the damage, he was there. Overstreet forced Kelly into his white van at gunpoint. He drove her to Camp Atterbury, a remote military training facility with dense woods and isolated areas. Along the way, he called his brother Scott and asked for help, claiming his van had broken down. When Scott arrived, Michael told him he needed a ride to Edinburgh for himself.
The home of hockey is here.
Big start, man, big start!
And with the ESPN app, you can follow your team all season long. Catch the games you can only watch here. And oh yeah, Lord Stanley, it will be raised here. Sign up today and never miss a moment.
Has your card ever been declined at the worst possible moment? Have you ever woken up to surprise fees taking your hard-earned money from your bank account? If you've been a victim to traditional banks that don't have your back, you may be entitled to compensation. For the whopping price of $0 in monthly fees, Chime will spot up to $200 between each paycheck. You won't get declined if you stay in your spot me limit. You won't pay any overdraft fees. And there's no toll-free number to call. You can sign up with your phone right now and it only takes 2 minutes to apply. Don't wait. Act now on this not-so-limited offer.
And his girlfriend. Scott saw something white in the back of the van. Kelly, terrified and hidden, but didn't investigate closely. Michael directed Scott to drive deep into Camp Atterbury, to a gravel turnaround far from any roads or buildings. He told Scott to leave him there, and Scott complied, unaware of what was about to happen. Once alone with Kelly, Michael assaulted her, and then ended her life by strangling her with her own shoelace and a strap cut from her overalls. He also shot her once in the forehead. He left her body in a ravine and walked out of the woods. Kelly's car was found the next morning, September 27th, abandoned on the roadside with keys still in the ignition and lights on. Her mother, Connie Sutton, immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Kelly would never leave her car like that. A massive search began, and on September 30th, Kelly's body was discovered in the wooded area of Brown County, naked and bearing obvious signs of violence. For weeks, the case seemed impossible to solve. Then on November 6, 1997, police received a tip that Scott Overstreet had information. Scott came forward voluntarily and told investigators everything about the strange night his brother had asked for a ride. He led police to the gravel turnaround where he dropped Michael off, and searchers found Kelly's glasses, hair scrunchie, pager, necklace, and clothing remnants scattered in the area. On November 7th and 8th, police executed search warrants at Michael's home. They seized a hand-drawn map of Camp Atterbury, a blanket matching fibers found on Kelly's clothing, and carpet samples from the van that forensically matched materials on her body. They measured the van's front bumper and found it was at the exact height of the damage on Kelly's car. DNA evidence from Kelly's body matched Michael Overstreet. Michael was arrested and charged with murder, assault, and criminal confinement. His wife, Melissa, cooperated fully with investigators, telling them about Michael's obsessive interest in news coverage of Kelly's disappearance. She recalled him coming home with blood on his clothes one night and claiming he'd struck a dog. She described his knife obsession and his increasingly volatile behavior. She also mentioned he had watched news about Kelly's case with disturbing intensity, even knowing which channels would cover the story first. The trial in 2000 was emotionally devastating. Kelly's family sat through graphic testimony about her final hours. Forensic experts detailed the evidence linking Michael to the crime. Scott Overstreet testified against his own brother, describing the night he unknowingly helped transport a victim to her death. The jury convicted Michael on all counts and unanimously recommended a death sentence. The judge agreed, and Michael Overstreet was sent to death row. But as years passed, Michael's mental state deteriorated significantly. Prison psychiatrists diagnosed him with severe paranoid schizophrenia, noting symptoms including delusions and hallucinations. Multiple evaluations concluded that while Michael understood he'd been convicted of murder, his delusional thinking prevented him from rationally comprehending why he was being executed or the meaning of the punishment itself. In 2014, after extensive hearings featuring testimony from 4 psychiatrists, St. Joseph Superior Court Judge Jane Woodward Miller ruled that Michael Overstreet was mentally incompetent to be executed. The ruling, based on a 2007 U.S. Supreme Court decision, held that death row inmates cannot be put to death if they're incapable of rationally understanding what execution means and why it's happening. The Indiana Attorney General's office chose not to appeal, stating that Judge Miller's ruling was likely to be considered reasonable and wouldn't be overturned. However, the ruling doesn't invalidate Michael's conviction or death sentence. It simply suspends the execution indefinitely, unless his mental state improves enough for him to be deemed competent in the future. Kelly's mother, Connie Sutton, has expressed frustration with the ruling. She doesn't believe Michael is as mentally ill as doctors claim, and sees the competency hearing as an attempt to build sympathy for someone who deserves none. At clemency hearings, she said she hoped the system would ultimately allow justice to proceed. But as of now, Michael Overstreet remains on death row, alive but unable to be executed, his case frozen in legal limbo. The Overstreet case highlights the complicated intersection of mental illness and capital punishment. It raises difficult questions about how society should handle defendants who are clearly guilty, but whose mental deterioration makes them arguably unfit for execution. For Kelly Eckhart's family, it means living with the knowledge that her attacker is still alive, his fate uncertain, while Kelly's future was stolen from her more than 2 decades ago. Michael Dean, Overstreet's story proves that sometimes justice doesn't come in the form we expect, and that even death row.
Listen up, soccer fans. Why wait for the summer when the world's superstars are already battling?
That's what the Champions League's about.
Fighting not for flags, but for crests, and the blood-sworn faithful who follow them.
Oh, what a fabulous ball!
16 iconic clubs, 0 second chances, and every match is a main event. The UEFA Champions League knockout phase. Stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
Doesn't guarantee of attempted assault, having targeted a woman in a disturbing encounter that foreshadowed darker crimes to come. Makes them arguably unfit for execution. For Kelly Eckhart's family, it means living with the knowledge that her attacker is still alive, his fate uncertain, while Kelly's future was stolen from her more than 2 decades ago. Michael Dean, Overstreet's story proves that sometimes justice doesn't come in the form we expect, and that even death row doesn't guarantee the final chapter will ever be written. While Overstreet's execution remains suspended, one of Indiana's longest-serving death row inmates has been waiting for justice since 1989. Case 10. Eric D. Holmes. When the restaurant closed and the last customers left, 3 employees headed for the door, completely unaware that 2 former co-workers were waiting in the shadows with a plan for robbery and revenge. Eric Holmes had worked at the Shoney's restaurant in Marion County, Indiana, for at least 3 months in 1989. He was 21 years old, trying to make a living in a job that paid minimum wage and offered little hope for advancement. On his final day of employment, Eric got into an argument with a fellow worker named Amy Fauci. The dispute was serious enough that management terminated his employment on the spot. Eric left angry, humiliated, and, as events would prove, planning retaliation. That same day, Michael Vance, who had previously worked at the same Shoney's, was rehired and started his first shift back. He and Eric were friends, and as the day progressed, they began discussing what had happened. According to witness testimony, Eric's anger intensified as the hours passed. By the time the restaurant was preparing to close, he had made a chilling declaration to others. "I'm going to end that woman tonight." He also said he planned to spit on Amy's glasses, a strange, specific detail that witnesses would remember clearly. Late that evening, on November 15th, 1989, 3 employees were leaving the Shoney's after closing. Charles Irvin, a manager, Teresa Blusel, also a manager, and Amy Fauci, the worker Eric had argued with earlier. Irvin was carrying the cash till from the day's receipts. As they exited through the foyer, Eric Holmes and Michael Vance appeared, blocking their escape. Eric prevented them from going outside, while Vance blocked the path back into the restaurant. They were trapped. What happened next was savage and chaotic. Eric and Vance attacked all 3 employees with knives, stabbing them repeatedly. They grabbed the till containing the day's earnings and continued the assault. Amy Fauci would later testify that the attack felt endless, that she believed she was going to die in that foyer. Charles Irvin and Teresa Blusel suffered fatal wounds, bleeding out before help could arrive. Amy, despite multiple stab wounds, survived by sheer chance. After the attack, Eric and Vance fled to an apartment shared by Laura Scott and Andy Vance, Michael's relative. They arrived between 1 and 2 in the morning, playing loud music and acting erratically. Laura noticed blood on the bathroom rug and wall. Eric, apparently unable to contain his excitement, announced, "I ended those people." When police knocked on the door shortly afterward, responding to tips about the crime, Eric and Michael ran to the back of the apartment but were quickly apprehended. During his arrest, Eric made several bizarre statements. He said, "Murder in the first degree," followed by, "This is the real truth," and "We will triumph." The words suggested someone detached from reality, someone who viewed the brutal attack as some kind of victory, rather than the horrific crime it was. The evidence against both men was overwhelming. Amy Fauci survived to testify, identifying both Eric Holmes and Michael Vance as her attackers and describing the assault in excruciating detail. Forensic evidence linked them to the scene. Witnesses recounted Eric's threats earlier in the day. The cash till from Shoney's was recovered. There was no doubt about what had happened or who was responsible. Eric Holmes and Michael Vance were tried separately. Vance was convicted and sentenced to 190 years in prison, a lengthy term that ensured he would never be free, but not a death sentence. Eric Holmes, however, was treated differently by the legal system. Prosecutors argued that Eric had been the ringleader, the one who orchestrated the attack out of rage and revenge. They pointed to his threats against Amy Fauci as evidence of premeditation. The jury agreed. In 1993, Eric Holmes was convicted of 2 counts of intentional murder, attempted murder, and robbery. The jury recommended the death penalty, citing 2 aggravating circumstances: intentional murder during the commission of a robbery and multiple murders. The judge accepted the recommendation and sentenced Eric to death. The sentencing disparity between Holmes and Vance, one receiving death, the other receiving 190 years, became a point of contention during appeals. Eric's defense team argued that it was unjust for one participant to face execution, while the other, who had also physically attacked the victims, received a lesser sentence. But courts consistently upheld the distinction, noting that prosecutors had proven Eric was the primary instigator and that his threats earlier in the day demonstrated intent to harm. Eric's case has moved through the appeals process for over 3 decades. His attorneys have raised numerous challenges, claims of jury misconduct, improper evidence admission, ineffective counsel, and constitutional violations related to Indiana's death penalty statutes. Every appeal has been denied. The Indiana Supreme Court has reviewed his case multiple times, finding no merit in his arguments. The U.S. Supreme Court has declined to hear his case on multiple occasions. One particularly contentious issue involved the fact that the jury deadlocked during the penalty phase and couldn't reach a unanimous recommendation for death. Under Indiana law at the time, the judge was authorized to impose a death sentence even without jury unanimity, as long as the aggravating circumstances had been proven beyond reasonable doubt during the guilt phase. Courts ruled this procedure didn't violate constitutional requirements, distinguishing Eric's case from others where juries hadn't considered aggravating factors at all. Eric Holmes has now been on death row for more than 30 years, making him one of Indiana's longest-serving condemned inmates. His case predates the 15-year execution moratorium that ended in 2024, and his legal challenges show no signs of resolution. Federal habeas corpus appeals have been exhausted, with courts consistently finding that his trial was fair and his conviction sound. The families of Charles Irvin and Teresa Blosel have waited decades for closure, watching as appeals dragged on year after year. Amy Fauci, who survived the attack, has had to live with the physical and emotional scars of that night, knowing that one of her attackers might someday face execution, while the other will simply die of old age behind bars. Eric Holmes's case represents the slowest moving machinery of justice in Indiana's death penalty system. It's a reminder that capital punishment in America isn't swift or certain. It's a process that can take decades, leaving victims' families in perpetual limbo and raising questions about whether such prolonged uncertainty serves any purpose.
I am Captain Jonah Veritek. If you are seeing this message, remember, do not respond to...
Number 1. Ali Abulaban, known online as Jinn Kid. He was once known for making people laugh with quick impressions and comedy skits. But behind the polished videos and nearly 1 million followers, Ali Abulaban was hiding something darker. In October 2021, his public persona as the TikTok comedian Jinn Kid collided with a private life full of jealousy, rage, and obsession. What began as a story of online fame ended in 2 people dead, a trial that shocked California, and a sentence that ensures he will never walk free again. Ali Abulaban was born in 1995 and grew up in Virginia before moving to San Diego, California. For years, he worked small jobs while chasing the dream of becoming a full-time entertainer. TikTok became his platform of choice. Under the name Jin Kid, Ali built a following with impersonations of Tony Montana from Scarface, quick sketches about everyday life, and lighthearted comedy bits that spread rapidly through the app. His fan base grew to nearly 1 million followers, and in the world of TikTok, that kind of number can change a person's life. To his viewers, Ali was a rising digital star with a young family and a future in entertainment. To those closest to him, however, the story was not nearly as bright. Behind the scenes, Ali's marriage to his wife Anna was falling apart. Friends later testified that their relationship had become turbulent, marked by arguments, jealousy, and distrust. By 2021, Anna had separated from him and was trying to build a new life, though she remained in contact because of their young daughter. While she wanted distance, Ali struggled to let go. Instead of focusing on his online career, he grew consumed with watching Anna's every move. That obsession would soon turn deadly. On October 21st, 2021, Anna was at her San Diego apartment with a male friend, a man she had recently grown close to. Unbeknownst to her, Ali had secretly installed a listening device on his daughter's iPad, allowing him to eavesdrop on the apartment whenever he wanted. That afternoon, Ali listened in and believed he heard Anna with another man. Enraged, he grabbed a gun, drove to the complex, and let himself inside. Within moments, he shot both Anna and her friend at point-blank range. The act was swift, brutal, and fueled by jealousy. After the shootings, Ali fled the apartment but did not attempt to cover his tracks. In fact, he called his mother and admitted what he had done, telling her he had hurt Anna. He even picked up his daughter from school before being arrested later that day by San Diego police. The arrest ended the short career of an influencer whose digital fame had hidden deep personal turmoil. The case quickly became national news, dubbed by some outlets as the TikTok murders. Investigators uncovered how Ali had been monitoring Anna through the iPad, revealing just how calculated his surveillance had become. Prosecutors described him as controlling, jealous, and consumed by a need to dominate his estranged wife. Forensic evidence, combined with his own admissions, left little doubt as to what happened that afternoon. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Prosecutors charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder, alongside enhancements for using a firearm. The defense tried to argue that Ali acted in the heat of passion, but the jury was not persuaded. The evidence of premeditation, the hidden listening app, his drive to the apartment, and his decision to bring a loaded weapon was overwhelming. In 2024, after years of proceedings delayed by the pandemic and legal wrangling, the jury found him guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was devastating. Family members of the victims gave tearful statements about the lives that had been stolen. The prosecution pushed for the harshest possible punishment, noting the cruelty of Ali's actions and his lack of remorse. The judge agreed. In September 2024, Ali Abulaban was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years for the firearm charges. The judge told him directly that he would die in prison, calling him selfish and unrepentant. For Anna's family, the sentence offered some measure of justice, but no real comfort. Their daughter, sister, and friend was gone forever, along with the young man who happened to be at her side that day. For Ali, the sentence marked the end of a short, troubled journey from TikTok stardom to life in a maximum security prison. The story serves as a grim reminder that fame can disguise deeper problems, and that unchecked jealousy can turn into irreversible tragedy. Ali Abulaban will never again return to TikTok or see freedom. His daughter, now left to grow up without either parent, is perhaps the most tragic victim of all. What was once a family comedy brand is now a cautionary tale about obsession, violence, and the dark side of social media fame. And Ali Abuelabin isn't the only influencer whose crimes ended with a life behind bars. The next case takes us across the Atlantic, to the UK, where a TikTok star's pursuit of status and revenge ended in a deadly car chase. Number 2. Mahek Bukhari. She styled herself as a glamorous TikTok influencer, showing off clothes, cars, and a taste of the celebrity lifestyle. But behind the curated posts and social media smiles, Mahek Bukhari was hiding a secret that would eventually destroy her future. In February 2022, a late-night car chase through the streets of Leicestershire turned into one of the most shocking murder cases the UK had seen in years. At the center of it all was Mahek, her mother, and a plan that went far beyond petty online drama. Mahek Bukhari was just 24 years old at the time. She had grown up in Stoke-on-Trent and built a modest following on TikTok, where she posted fashion tips, lifestyle videos, and aspirational content. While she wasn't one of the biggest stars on the platform, she projected an image of success that made her appear larger than life. She often showcased luxury items, glamorous nights out, and the kind of lifestyle that drew attention from young fans. But away from TikTok, Mahek's home life was tense. Her mother, Ansrain, was in a complicated relationship with a man named Saqib Hussain. That relationship would spiral into betrayal, blackmail, and violence, pulling Mahek directly into the middle. Saqib Hussain, along with his friend Hashim Ijazuddin, became entangled in Mahek's life after Saqib allegedly threatened to expose details of his affair with Ansrain. He claimed he would reveal private messages and photographs unless the Bukharis paid him. Fearing reputational damage and public humiliation, Mahek and her mother devised a plan to silence him. They promised to meet Saqib and Hashim late at night, under the pretense of working things out. In reality, it was a setup. Mahek and Ansrain gathered a group of accomplices, and together, they lured the two men to a meeting spot near Leicester. On the night of February 11th, 2022, Saqib and Hashim arrived in a silver Skoda. Soon after, Mahek and her group showed up in two cars, including an Audi and a Seat Leon. What followed was not a conversation, but a high-speed pursuit. Witnesses later testified to seeing cars racing through the dark, weaving in and out of traffic, and chasing the Skoda along the A46 dual carriageway. At one point, one of the pursuing cars deliberately rammed into the back of the Skoda, sending it careening off the road. The car slammed into a central barrier, erupted in flames, and within minutes, both Saqib and Hashim were dead. Investigators quickly pieced together that this was no accident. Emergency calls revealed that Saqib had dialed 999 during the chase, desperately telling dispatchers that men in two cars were trying to kill him. That recording became a key piece of evidence, capturing his terror in his final moments and confirming that the crash was intentional. Forensic analysis of the wreckage showed clear impact points, consistent with the Skoda being forced off the road. Within days, police arrested Mahek, her mother, and several associates on suspicion of murder. The case captured national attention in the UK. The idea that a young TikTok influencer could be involved in such a calculated killing stunned the public. When the trial began in 2023, prosecutors painted a damning picture. They argued that Mahek used her social media bravado to mask a reckless, manipulative side, and that she helped orchestrate the attack to protect her mother's reputation. The defense tried to cast doubt, suggesting Mahek had not intended for anyone to die, but the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, witness statements, and the chilling 999 call all pointed to a deliberate plan. In August 2023, after months of testimony, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Mahek Bukhari and her mother Ansrain were convicted of the murders of Saqib Hussain and Hashim Ijazuddin. Several other co-defendants were found guilty of manslaughter. The judge, Justice Saini, did not mince words during sentencing. He told Mahek that her tawdry fame and utterly self-obsessed behavior had contributed to a mindset where she treated human lives as disposable. He described the crime as a cold and calculated act driven by vanity and fear of exposure. The sentences reflected the severity of the crime. Mahek Bukhari was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 31 years and 8 months before she can even be considered for release. Her mother, Ansrain, received life with a minimum of 26 years and 9 months. For two men in their early 20s who lost their lives in that fiery crash, justice came in the form of some of the longest sentences handed down in recent UK history for a case linked to influencer culture. The fallout was immense. TikTok accounts dedicated to Mahek's glamorous life were flooded with comments of shock and outrage. News outlets highlighted the disturbing contrast between her carefully curated online persona and the real-life conspiracy that ended in murder. The case has since become a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media image, reckless ambition, and the willingness to sacrifice others to maintain appearances. Today, Mahek sits in a British prison, her once active TikTok silent, and her name now forever associated not with fame, but with infamy. She will be middle-aged by the time she is even eligible for parole, and there is no guarantee she will ever walk free again. What was once an attempt to live a glamorous life on social media instead ended in violence, ruined families, and a future locked behind bars. While Mahek's crimes shocked the UK, another case in the United States revealed how a seemingly wholesome family influencer was hiding one of the darkest secrets of all. Number 3. Ruby Franca. For years, she was known as the wholesome face of family life on YouTube. Ruby Franca built an audience of over 2.5 million subscribers on her channel, 8 Passengers, where she filmed the everyday routines of raising 6 children in suburban Utah. Viewers saw her as a devoted mother, sharing advice about discipline, parenting struggles, and the ups and downs of family life. Her channel was part of the booming family vlogger scene, where ordinary households became digital celebrities. To her fans, Ruby seemed like a trustworthy guide on how to raise children. But in August 2023, the facade collapsed. What appeared to be a picture-perfect family was hiding an environment of cruelty, control, and abuse that shocked the world when it came to light.